25 years old, rent due in 4 days, $211 in checking. And somewhere on the internet, a stranger is telling you that you're already behind. That feeling, that low hum of, I should be doing something with my money, it's not random, it's manufactured. Every finance app, every influencer, every headline about 22-year-old millionaires is built to make you feel late. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody puts in the thumbnail. You're not late, you're early. Almost nobody starts at 25, and that's exactly why the ones who do end up somewhere the rest of the room can't reach. This isn't a motivational video. There won't be a countdown of habits or a fake whiteboard. This is about math. Cold, quiet, compounding math, and what it actually does to a life over 40 years versus what people assume it does. Let's start with why this moment, 25, matters more than people think and less than the internet claims. Right now, the average American doesn't start seriously saving for retirement until their mid-30s. Not because they're lazy, because life at 22 to 29 is expensive in ways nobody warns you about. Student debt, first apartments, weddings, the slow-bleeding cost of just becoming a functional adult. So when someone says, start at 25, they're not saying start early. They're saying start before the excuses harden into identify. Because here's what happens if you don't. At 30, I'll start soon becomes I'll start when I get a raise. At 35, it becomes I'll start when the kids are older. At 45, it becomes something people stop saying out loud. The starting line doesn't move. People just stop walking toward it. So why 25 specifically? Not because it's magic. Because of one variable almost nobody respects until it's too late. Time. And time, in investing, doesn't behave the way your brain expects. Let's break the system down. Not the hype version. The actual mechanics. Say at 25 you start putting $400 a month into a simple index fund. Something that tracks the broader stock market. Nothing exotic. Nothing you saw on a late-night trading app ad. Historically, the market has returned around 7% a year after inflation, over long stretches. Not every year. Some years it's down 20%. Some years it's up 30%. But smoothed out over decades, 7 is a reasonable, boring, unglamorous average. $400 a month for 40 years at 7%. You end up mere $1.1 million. Total money you actually put in? $192,000. Everything else, nearly $1 million, was built by nothing. No extra hours worked. No side hustle. Just time, doing what time does when you leave it alone. Now here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Take that same person, same fund, same 7%. But they wait until 35 to start instead of 25. Just 10 years later, to end up at the same 1.1 million by 65, they don't need to contribute a little more. They need to contribute almost double, around $750 a month, not $400. 10 years of waiting doesn't cost you 10 years of savings. It costs you almost double the monthly effort, forever, just to catch up to where the early starter arrives on autopilot. That's not a motivational statistic. That's arithmetic being quietly ruthless. This is the part nobody tells you about compounding. It's not exciting for the first decade. For the first 10 years, your account barely moves. You put in $48,000 and you're sitting there with maybe 60. It feels like nothing is happening. And that's exactly the point where most people quit, right before the curve bends upward, because the growth in the early years is almost invisible, and the growth in the later years is almost unbelievable. It's the same reason folding a piece of paper in half 50 times would theoretically get you to the moon. The first 10 folds look like nothing. The last few folds look like fiction. Money compounding works the same way, except most people give up around fold number 8. Now let's talk about the gap between the hype and the reality, because this is where the internet gets dangerous. The hype version of Start Young looks like this: a 23-year-old in a rented Lamborghini, talking about how he turned $500 into 50,000 trading options. The implication is always the same. Wealth is fast if you're smart enough, or brave enough, or plugged into the right secret. The reality is almost insultingly boring by comparison. The people who actually build durable wealth from 25 onward are statistically doing something closer to nothing. Automatic transfers, index funds, no day trading, no timing the market. Fidelity has tracked which accounts performed best over long periods, and one finding keeps surfacing. Some of the strongest results come from accounts belonging to people who forgot they had one, or who had passed away and the account simply sat untouched. The dead outperform the anxious. That's not a joke. That's a data point about human behavior. Let's zoom out though, because there's a bigger, less comfortable layer to this. Starting at 25 isn't just a math problem. It's a policy bet. The entire modern retirement system, 401ks, IRAs, the whole architecture, was built on an assumption from the 1980s that markets would keep growing roughly the way they had for the previous 50 years, and that individuals, not companies or governments, should shoulder the responsibility of funding their own old age. That's a relatively recent shift. Pensions used to do this job. Now you do, which means the 25-year-old starting today isn't just building wealth. They're quietly opting into a system that assumes the next 40 years of markets behave roughly like the last 80, through wars, inflation shocks, technological upheaval, and whatever comes after that. Nobody can promise that. The 7% number is a rearview mirror, not a guarantee. And there's a second risk people don't like discussing. Inflation isn't a footnote. It's the entire plot. A dollar sitting in a savings account earning nothing isn't neutral. It's losing purchasing power every single year, quietly, the way rust works on a car nobody drives. Not investing isn't the safe choice people think it is. It's just a slower, quieter kind of loss. So the 25-year-old who starts isn't choosing between risk and safety. They're choosing between a visible risk they can manage, market volatility, and an invisible one they can't, inflation eroding cash that just sits there feeling secure. Here's where it gets genuinely strange, though. This whole conversation, the one about starting early, compounding, index funds, assumes a fairly stable, fairly predictable world. 40 years of steady contributions, steady jobs, steady markets. But the 25-year-old of today is stepping into a labor market being reshaped by automation, by artificial intelligence doing work that used to guarantee a paycheck, by a job security landscape that looks nothing like it did for their parents. Which raises the real, uncomfortable question underneath all of this. Is the advice to start building wealth at 25 timeless? Or is it advice built for a world that might not exist by the time that 25-year-old turns 65? Maybe the honest answer is both. The math of compounding doesn't care what decade it is. 7%, given enough time, still bends the same way it always has. But the assumption that a stable job, a stable market, and a stable 40-year runway will simply be there, waiting, the way it was for the generations before, that part is no longer something anyone can promise you. So here's what's actually true. Stripped of hype and stripped of fear. Starting at 25 doesn't guarantee you $1 million. It doesn't guarantee anything. What it does is buy you optionality, decades of time for a system that has, historically, rewarded patience over intensity and boredom over brilliance. The Lamborghini kid on the internet is not going to be fine in 30 years. The person quietly moving $400 into an index fund every month, feeling like nothing is happening, might be. The question isn't really whether you should start at 25, the question is whether you can sit still long enough in a world engineered to make you feel like sitting still is falling behind, to let something slow actually work.